Is it possible to run an election so that everyone, win or lose, accepts the results? This week on Firing Line.
We have now counted legally cast ballots 3 times, and the results remain unchanged.
He's the Georgia Secretary of State who rejected former President Trump's pressure.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Enough votes to overturn Trump's loss in Georgia. Brad Raffensperger is a lifelong Republican, an engineer who turned to politics, then found himself in the middle of the 2020 firestorm.
I understand the Secretary of State, who is really, he's an enemy of the people.
He's received death threats and won re-election in 2022, despite a challenge from a Trump-backed opponent. He's also defended his state against allegations from the left.
Jim Crow 2.0 is about 2 insidious things: voter suppression and election subversion.
With Trump's phone call at the center of criminal investigations and Georgia preparing for 2024, what does Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger say now?
Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is made possible in part by Robert Granieri, Vanessa and Henry Cornell, the Fairweather Foundation, the Tepper Foundation, the Asness Family Foundation, the McKenna Family Foundation, Charles R. Schwab, and by the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation and Damon Button. Corporate funding is provided by Stevens, Inc.
Secretary Brad Raffensperger, welcome to Firing Line.
Thank you.
Many people may know you first and foremost as the Georgia state official who on January 2nd, 2021, was asked by Donald Trump to, quote, find 11,780 votes in order to help him overturn the 2020 election, which you refused to do. Viewers may not know that before you were in politics, you were a structural engineer, and you have written that as an engineer, I think about the machinery of elections. I think about the process. How has your engineering background prepared you to run elections in one of the country's most contested states?
Well, it's interesting. The mechanization, the operation of elections is really something that is well suited for someone that is very methodical. And so for engineers, we're very methodical about the process.
That call with former President Trump, you've written how it turned your life upside down in some ways. You and your aides spent days, hours, days, weeks refuting the various conspiracy theories about voter fraud. And at other points in your tenure as Secretary of State, you've also faced accusations from the left of voter suppression. How widespread are these two hot button issues, both voter fraud and voter suppression, in today's debate about voting?
I think there's segments on both sides, of the aisle. The losing candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams, she lost by 55,000 votes, and she then talked about voter suppression. But they're really the same coin. It's about really stolen election claims, but one is voter suppression and the other one is voter fraud. Another one are supported by the facts.
Is the real epidemic a lack of confidence and integrity in our elections?
Well, I think the real issue is that when people lose the race, I think they just really need to accept the loss and then come back 4 years later if they want to run again. Because I think it would probably work out a whole lot better for them. Because when Stacey Abrams ran the last time in 2022, she lost by over 350,000 votes. It wasn't close at all.
Both Stacey Abrams and President Trump, former President Trump, spent a lot of time berating and undermining the process and the system. And I wonder if you would care to comment about what the rhetoric about voter fraud and voter suppression does to the public's confidence in the integrity of the election system.
Well, I think it really tears apart the social fabric because people don't trust it, so they have a lack of confidence.
I want to ask you about election deniers. I mean, there are people who flat out deny the election was won by Joe Biden. There's sort of a sense of disbelief about the notion that Joe Biden could have won. 12 million more votes he won than Barack Obama in 2008. How do you tackle just explaining this to somebody?
Well, number one, is so many more people were voting with absentee voting, voting by mail, and most people were at home. So, there's just more opportunities. They weren't distracted with other things. More people came out to vote during the pandemic. They thought it was important. And so they came out and expressed their will. But also President Trump, he actually got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. So just really the turnout model for everyone was just a lot higher.
And what do you tell Republicans in Georgia who still question the results of the election? Why did Donald Trump lose Georgia?
Well, simply put, when I go out and I talk to community groups, I tell them here is a simple fact that 28,000 people skipped the presidential race. They didn't vote for anyone, and yet they voted down ballot in other races. And what's really interesting is that the Republican congressmen collectively got about 28,000 more votes than President Trump did. That's why he came up short.
Your chief operating officer,
Yes.
Gabriel Sterling, spent 2 months after the election holding regular press conferences, challenging the misinformation that was flowing from Donald Trump and his allies. An Atlantic Journal-Constitution poll conducted in August found that 61% of likely Georgia Republican primary voters still believe there was widespread fraud in 2020. Are there some people who are not persuadable?
Well, that's why I do go out and I talk to people, because I also let them know. They said there was 10,000 dead people and there was only 4. We actually have very good records, and we verify, who the voters are, and we found that there were 4 people that, voted, assumed the identity of someone that had already passed away.
And in 2 cases, wasn't it family members?
It was family members, and
who were voting for their deceased family member as
and
they
actually,
believed they would have
two
wanted
of them
to?
were actually Republicans, and 2 of them were the other side. So it was bipartisan. On both
canceled each
sides,
other
they
out.
canceled each other out. But they're both brought
still
before
not okay,
they're
of
brought
course.
before the state election board, and they're prosecuted for that, and they get the penalty. But it's not widespread.
Tell me, Mr. Secretary, have you had the personal experience of being able to persuade or change the mind of any individual who first was in total disbelief about the things you've said and then came to see it through the lens of the truth that you've laid out?
I won my primary without a runoff.
So what you're saying is
I was reelected. So I think that I've obviously
you persuaded the state of Georgia.
I've convinced enough Georgians, that, okay, I see that.
It seems to me that there has been a sea change in how voter ID is discussed and understood in the popular conversation. There was a time around 2018 and early 2020 where voter ID laws were widely panned and criticized by the left. And it seems as though there has been a change in the thinking and, frankly, the opposition to voter ID laws. To what do you attribute that?
Because we have peer-reviewed studies from intellectuals at universities, think tanks that have showed that it does not hurt turnout.
Of the sort of 2%, a very low percentage of people that don't have any sort of IDs, the largest group of those individuals are Americans of color. How do you tackle that continued critique of voter ID?
Well, when the General Assembly did photo ID years ago for in-person voting, they said it's not just your driver's license, not everyone has one, but 96% of all people do. But we'll accept all these other forms of government ID, plus even a power bill. Well, there's less than 200,000 people in the whole state of Georgia that would not qualify for this, but they can get a free photo ID or voter ID, all by just asking the state, and we'll make sure they get it.
Switching Georgia to a system where printed ballots were used as one of your first priorities when you came to office. How did the 2020 election reinforce the importance of having a physical paper trail?
Well, it's really important to have a paper ballot. Over 95% of all ballots in America this next election will have a paper ballot, but that means you can audit any race. In fact, in 2020, many Georgians and many Americans don't realize we had recounted all 5 million paper ballots, and we had 3 stacks, one for President Trump, one for Vice President Biden, and one for the Libertarian candidate. 3 different stacks, added them all up, and President Trump still came up short.
Starting in 2020, Georgia allowed election workers to begin to open and scan absentee ballots before Election Day. This process, called pre-processing, is something that other swing states, especially in the wake of COVID, had implemented. And in some cases where they had not, it did create significant delays in counting the ballots. Does getting all of the ballots counted faster
Yes.
contribute to higher confidence in the results of the election?
I believe it does. When things get extended out, that really becomes the breeding ground for conspiracy theories. So we believe that it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and do pre-processing. That way you're going to get much quicker results. And where it really matters is in these states where the margins are so close. So when it's 10 to 20,000 votes difference between the top vote getters, the more that you can get those results posted quickly, that is good for really the calmness of the electorate.
As you think about these reforms in states, which states besides Georgia are doing a good job of making those kind of reforms in order to eliminate uncertainty around the counting of the electorate? I know you're focused on Georgia, but you must look over your shoulder and see what states are also sort of representing a gold standard.
I think I'll stay in my lane. What I will say is, if you look at where we are right now, we're recognized as one of the top tier states for election integrity, which we think is the proper balance of accessibility with security. So in Georgia, we know you're going to have an honest, fair, accurate election. And that's what we really, we've struck that balance. And so we have 17 days of early voting. We have photo ID for all forms of voting. And we put in state law that lines have to be shorter than an hour on election day so people have a pleasurable experience. We understand that people aren't going to be happy. I said this back in January 2020. We live in a polarized nation. I know that half the people are going to be happy, the other half won't be. We want them to have 100% confidence in their race. It's kind of like the football game. We don't want you grousing about the call that the ref made. We want you to accept the victory or the loss of the teams that played that game.
Let me ask you, a few months after President Biden was inaugurated, the Georgia state legislature passed SB 202, a series of voting reforms. Many of these new measures were tested for the first time in the 2022 midterm elections, and results seemed resoundingly positive. Record high turnout, accurate results, quick results, and you said that the state's election system, quote, passed every test.
It did.
For the people who looked at SB 202 and called it Jim Crow 2.0, what gives?
Well, we don't expect any apologies because people that said that, a lot of them were politicians from up in Washington, D.C., or they used to run for office here in Georgia. We get that. But we showed that we have safe, honest, fair, accurate elections, and we kept lines short. And so we really hit the high mark. And so we just continue to put our head down, and we just continue to make sure we have great elections for our fellow Georgians.
To administer our elections, we have historically relied on volunteers to manage their precincts, their polling places. There has been a change in the climate, and there has been a diminishment of volunteerism. What can be done to address the lower participation rates amongst our citizens in our election administration?
I think that if you go back historically, elections are run at the state level and really at the county level. And I'm really, grateful and gratified for what I'm seeing here at our counties in Georgia. We have 159 counties, but so many of them have newer facilities or updated facilities, remodeled facilities, more secure facilities, and they're investing in their staff and their teams. And I'm really, grateful to see that investment in that. And I think it's really, speaking to people's civic pride. If you want to make, your community better, you want to make your state better or your country better, volunteer to be a poll worker. If you have questions about the whole process, volunteer to be a poll worker, not a poll watcher. I actually do the hard work of showing up there at 6 a.m. and being there till 8:30 or 9 o'clock that night. Then you're going to go through that whole process and you're going to have your eyes on it, and you're going to be an educated expert, and you're going to be able to say to your friends, oh no, that's not how that happens. And you can start nipping some of these conspiracy theories in the bud at the grassroots level because you understand the processes that we have in place.
There are real risks for poll workers. Some Georgia citizens came under attack by the President of the United States for just showing up and doing their job and supervising the election in the last election place. How do you combat the fact that the climate has really changed around?
I know it has, but you have to understand, I don't think the American people are fearful people. We haven't been. We've been bold, and we've always led with our great values that we do have. And that's what you see at the community level. So we just really, people just say, remember remember who we are. We're Americans, and we can do better, and we can step up when our nation needs us. And right now, we need you to volunteer to be poll workers. Imagine if we all showed up to vote and we didn't have poll workers. What would we do? Yes, they're indispensable.
I know you admire Ronald Reagan. This program, Firing Line, was once, obviously, it was hosted by William F. Buckley Jr. for 33 years. And Ronald Reagan was a regular guest on Buckley's program. One of the things that they talked about in one of their interviews was gerrymandering. Take a look at this conversation from 1990.
What I think it should be done is that there should be a bipartisan commission appointed every 10 years to redraw the districts to reflect what were the changes in population and so forth. Instead, when you leave it to the legislatures, it is a conflict of interest because these are people now that are looking at their own district and so forth. And the result has been the gerrymandering is they will shape a district. Granted, they will funnel as many Republicans as they can, but into as few districts as possible. And then they're assured of the majority. And they've done this. And when I asked for a map at the districts of the Los Angeles area, I got a package that looked like a nest of snakes. They just, every twist and turn that you can find in order to maintain that majority in the legislature.
Both parties do it. Is it time that we consider Ronald Reagan's suggestion?
Well, some states have, and other states use the General Assembly. And over the years, I've always been pretty strong that leave it up to General Assemblies. And right now, the districts have been looked at by a federal judge. It's an ongoing legal case, so I won't comment further.
For the viewers, a federal judge last month ruled that the district drawn by Republicans in Georgia's legislature discriminated against black voters by diluting their political power and must be redrawn before the 2024 election.
And so we are where we are, and we'll have a special session here in Georgia, and then that'll come before the court. And while because it's before the court right now, I don't weigh in on legal matters like that. I let the General Assembly do their work.
I have some broader questions for you about the state of the Republican Party. You got into politics, as you write in your book, thinking that you'd be focused on completely different issues, perhaps criminal justice reform, making government more conducive to building businesses. You write about a deeply personal experience you had in the loss of your son to a fentanyl overdose. I don't know that when you got into this, you thought you would end up becoming a poster child for election integrity and for standing up to a bullying president who wanted to overturn an election. How do you reflect on where you've ended up?
I guess the sovereignty of God. He put me here, and I'm just here to do my job. It's as simple as that. We've got a law, follow the law, follow the Constitution, respect it.
In a Veterans Day speech last week, former President Trump declared himself, quote, a very proud election denier. The recently elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, as you know, was part of the congressional leadership back in early 2021 that organized the Texas lawsuit that intended to overturn Georgia's election results. You spend your time ensuring the integrity of the elections in your state. How do you handle or grapple with the fact that a significant and important part of the GOP has glommed on to the lies around our elections?
All I can do is just continue to do my job, continue to speak the truth. I think right now it's better to have a calm voice, a quiet voice, than a loud, angry voice. I think that I always lean into just the basic goodness of the American people, my fellow Georgians. I think people are looking for someone that'll do the right thing. I think we're looking for calmer days. I said, I mean this with full respect, but maybe we need to make boring great again. Like, maybe we need an Eisenhower. Because people say, that was kind of boring. Was it really? In the 50s, we had peace and we had prosperity. And then you look at Reagan, he inherited the inflation that he inherited, but he beat that. And then he also started beating back the Soviets. So we had, strength. We felt pride in our nation.
Former President Trump has been indicted in Georgia and in federal court over his attempts to overturn the election here in Georgia. You testified before the Fulton County Grand Jury. You were interviewed by federal prosecutors working with Special Counsel Jack Smith. Do you feel that you've done all you can to hold Trump accountable for his actions?
Well, it's not my job to hold him accountable. My job is to say what happened, what didn't happen. And I think that people, if you read a lot of business books like I have over the years, but Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is number one, you got to face the brutal truth. And the brutal truth is 28,000 people skipped the presidential race. The brutal truth is Republican congressmen got 28,000 more votes than President Trump. The brutal truth is that's why he came up short. But once you know the brutal truth, then you can kind of grow from that and move forward from that. And so you could really build a campaign that could win based on the truth. And that's going to really be something that's stable. But if you don't face the brutal truth, it's always going to hold you back. But also, I would say to everyone, whatever you run for, no matter what you run for, just remember that the American people are positive and aspirational. They're not into retribution, not into anger, and they're not into vitriol. It may work for a season, but it won't work for more than 2 seasons. Americans are looking for someone that's sunny, positive, and leading people forward. I rest my case with Ronald Reagan. He just had a sunny disposition. He was just really a nice guy, but he was also very principled, and character was king when he was the president.
The fact is, as all of us can see from the polls, that President Trump is leading in the presidential primary. You've suggested optimistically that Republicans can learn from their mistakes. One of the mistakes in the past is that the majority of Republicans wanted somebody other than Trump in the primary, but divided those votes so that he came away with a plurality. It looks like that might happen again.
Well, if it does, we are going to run an election, and we will tell you the counties have reported these numbers, and here we've collated them, and here's the victory. And it very well could be President Trump. And if it is, we're going to announce what the results are, and we're going to make sure we have fair and honest elections in Georgia.
In the Georgia indictment, many Republicans have dismissed the Fulton case as frankly, the Fulton case and the federal probe as a witch hunt. In your estimation, though, do you think that this judicial process is motivated by partisanship?
As it relates to
President Trump's process.
No, I think that they're going through a process, and they've already received, people that have pled guilty to, certain things, and so that's there for everyone to come to their own conclusion. But I know that what happened in Georgia has been very clear, and I've talked about all the allegations that were made, and we have the numbers on our side, and time has proven us right.
Yeah. President Trump also said in his Veterans Day speech, quote, "We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country that lie and steal and cheat on elections." I know you don't want to take a public position on the 2024 election, but as an elected Republican, are you comfortable with that rhetoric?
I would prefer speech that's more in line with what I guess I grew up with Ronald Reagan. That was more positive. I think that positive builds, negative kills. As an engineer, it takes a lot more energy to build a building than to go ahead and blow it up. How do we increase people's individual prosperity? That's what we really should all be about. Not looking backwards and holding grudge matches. We don't hold grudges. Heck, we fought the British in 1776. Then we fought them again in the War of 1812, and now they're just a good ally. And I think that's the American way. We make friends, we don't make enemies. We try to be friends with everyone, but sometimes diplomatically, and I know geopolitically, you can't. I understand that. And that's why you need someone with the guts of a Reagan that'll stand up to communists, the true communists that are out there, in the other parts of the world.
You were declared an enemy of the people. You and your family and your staff received threats, death threats. At one point, you even had to go into hiding, leave your house. Are you ready for 2024?
Best we can be. And we're trying to prepare our counties for any potential threat vector we could have. So we understand cybersecurity. And after the fentanyl-laced letters we just got, last week sent out to election offices, and one was intersected before it got to Fulton County. Okay, got it. We'll put that on our radar also. But so you look at what could happen, and you try and, game play out any potentiality of what you could have. We just know that it will be a contentious race because we live in a 50-50, very polarized environment right now. We expect record turnout. We expect strong turnout. And we want to make sure people know that we're going to have safe, honest, fair, accurate elections.
Secretary Brad Raffensperger, thank you for joining me on Firing Line.
Thank you.
Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is made possible in part by Robert Granieri, Vanessa and Henry Cornell, the Fairweather Foundation, the Tepper Foundation, the Asness Family Foundation, the McKenna Family Foundation, Charles R. Schwab, and by the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation and Damon Button. Corporate funding is provided by Stevens, Inc.
You're watching PBS.